Tanzania, Côte d'Ivoire, and Cameroon have all just held their presidential elections. Now, in all three nations, familiar patterns in African elections have emerged. But Africa can be quite diverse in its political and economic outlook. While many African countries today adhere to the African Union's Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, the outcome of the vote is still quite mixed. Well, this week on the program, we'll ask how can Africa move beyond just voting to holding elections that truly deliver the expectation of the people. I'm Uche Okoronkwo. Welcome to Talk Africa. Elections are meant to give the people a voice, an opportunity to make the right choices that deliver results. Well, let's bring in our panel of experts to make sense of all of this for us. Joining us from Yaoundé, Cameroon is Dr. Pipi Hughes. He's a political analyst, a lecturer and also researcher of international law and human rights at the United Nations mandated University for Peace. In Abidjan, via Zoom, Guillaume Libby, an economist, joins us. And in Cape Town, also via Zoom, is Jervin Naidu. He's a political economist at Oxford Economics Africa. A very warm welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us in this discussion. Dr. Hughes, I'd like to start off with you briefly. What were some of the key issues in the Tanzania, Côte d'Ivoire and Cameroon elections that, of course, voters there cared about?
Most voters care about the provision of basic facilities. They need good roads, they need water, they need electricity, they need jobs. And if you look at the political, economic, and social amenities in most of these countries, it is missing. I speak practically for Cameroon, where the minimum wage rate in Cameroon is very, very low. And many people wanted to see a change. That is why you see this high level of voter registration, first of all, to go to the polls. In 2018, we had 5 million people that registered to vote out of a population of more than 30 million. In 2025, we had 8-point-something million registered voters. That's an increase of 3-point-something million. It's to tell you that there was great awareness moving up to the October polls.
And what's your take, Mr. Naidu? As Dr. Hughes mentioned there, infrastructure, employment, these are some of the key issues for voters. Looking at the other two countries, Côte d'Ivoire, Tanzania, what's your take on what the issues are?
Yeah, no, I agree with Dr. Hughes. It's the same basic concerns. The cost of living crisis is quite bad, given the strength and currencies of African currencies. Basic provisions, water, lights, electricity, transport, but also Africans, particularly when I look at the case of Tanzania, they also have aspirational hopes. They want to see their country grow from just being, this basic kind of country or always being seen in the development lens to something amazing and something great, which I think our continent has to offer. So in Tanzania's case, there's also been a push for, they want greater infrastructure. They want the city to represent something world-class. This also just goes beyond the basic needs. They want a government that addresses all the needs. So yes, the basics, as Dr. Hughes mentioned, water, food, jobs, but they also want the governments to be forward-thinking and not just be reactive. I think that's a big problem with African governments broadly across the continent, very reactive. There's not a lot of proactive thinking on what Africa is going to look like in 10, 15 years. So we really need more of that from our leaders as well.
What would an ideal election look like before, during, and after voting? I know that's a huge question, but would love to hear your take.
Yeah, so I think before the elections, in both of these countries, people were quite optimistic. In Tanzania, people were optimistic about some kinds of change, but slowly as we got closer to the elections, for example, we started seeing some restrictions or constrictions of the democratic space. So when, for example, in the case of Tanzania, the CCM, the ruling Revolutionary Party, were initially seen as quite a reformist party. They institutionalized democracy, multi-party in 1992. But over the last couple of years, we've seen some reductions in the space. And probably in the last 8 to 9 months before the elections, we saw trends and ideas of, opposition were being barred. The Electoral Commission is not that independent in Tanzania. And then during the election, they have maintained some kind of impartiality. Their job, again, is just to count it. Once it's verified, it's pretty much they have the final say in the Tanzanian legal system. You can't go to court. And for example, in Cameroon, I know you can appeal it slightly, but the legalities in Tanzania are slightly different. Once the electoral commission declares it, like for example, in Zanzibar, they've already declared a winner, it's done. You can't do anything about it, and that's it. But the problem in Tanzania is the state and the electoral commission are very closely aligned. They're super closely aligned, which causes a big problem. In a lot of African countries where the electoral commission and the government are together, it's not a good recipe.
Mr. Liba, a key issue in Africa is weak institutions. So which institutions in Côte d'Ivoire do you think we need to see built or strengthened in order to hold credible elections, and also in order to restore trust in electoral institutions, electoral commissions, courts, and monitoring bodies? What do you think is needed there? What institutions need to be built or restored?
People should abide by the law, because everything in every country you have electoral body that manage the election. In some country they are independent, and the other country they are causing up with the sitting the government. So it really depends on it's a countrywide issue, so that we respect what we have put in our constitution. If everybody respect what we have put in the constitution, if you respect the law, if the law says that nobody should do or should serve more than two mandates, that should be respected. But in some countries, it is not the case. And fortunately, there are countries like Ghana, Senegal, where people are able to organize fair and free election, where everybody involved in the election trust each other. And of course, when the result come out, the losing party is calling the winning party to say, okay, fine, you won. So we need electoral bodies that are really independent, and we need people to get involved so that these institutions are strong enough to resist the will of the sitting government. Because when we have that, then we have a fair and free election where everybody can provide their idea and for the good of the country.
Dr. Hughes, what kind of institutions do you think African nations need to build or strengthen in order to hold credible elections?
Yes, the elections management body is the organization charged with the responsibility to manage elections across Africa. And for instance, in Cameroon, we have the Elections Cameroon. Now, one issue, like Nadia mentioned, it is the fact that most of these elections management bodies are not independent. There is no separation of power. Most officials within election management body are being appointed by the state. And so practically in Africa, when oppositions go into elections, they don't go into elections against the incumbent, they go into elections against the entire system. They go into election against the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature. So it is very, very difficult. So for us to strengthen, the election management body, they have to be independent. And how can we effectively ascertain that election management bodies are independent? Look at the morality, the moral standing of those who are involved in this electioneering. All right. When the incumbent appoints members in the election management body, those people who are appointed are answerable to the executive branch. And finance is a major limitation because most of these election management bodies rely solely on the state to finance their activities. And now, once the state finances you, you are answerable to the state. These are some of the problems which we face in most African countries, where election management bodies are puppets to the executive branch. And so they can't go, the saying says, he who pays the piper determines the tune. It is a major hindrance to most election management bodies. Now, how can they be strengthened? We bring in the African Union, which is that organ charged with the responsibility, to ensure our governance, our democracy, peace and security, and stability within the continent. The African Union itself, most people have termed it as a toothless bulldog because it barks, but it cannot bite. In Cameroon, they were here for election observation. 2 days after, the AU released a statement. In as much as there was high level of fraud, discrepancy, the AU says the elections were free, fair, and transparent. That is not possible. And this trend moves across the entire continent. And so we are saying that for elections to be transparent, for elections to be fair, election management bodies need to stand their ground. Like what we saw in Senegal, like what we saw in Ghana. These are beacons of democracy which African countries should look up to as examples.
Dr. Naidu, what's your take on that? Because we've not just seen trust lost in individual countries, but also in regional bodies. How can trust in electoral institutions, electoral commissions, courts, monitoring bodies, how can they be rebuilt and restored?
It takes a process of time, when, amongst the countries I monitor in Africa, probably Ghana and Mauritius are the only two that really have very strong electoral bodies, and they still have issues, amongst them. It's a process of time, and it needs to be built. Even for example, here in South Africa, we had elections last year, and our body is fairly independent, but there were lots of issues around funding. They were under-resourced, and I think the first part starts with if they can be resourced well, and also measures put in place that it's independent from, like a special fund is put in that is independent and not controlled by the state. Is you mentioned a nice explanation. Whoever pays the piper, pays the tune. It's the same thing. So the problem is the way in which the bodies are formed and the way in which they are funded. So if you can create a nice, clear model for that, you can slowly build trust. Also, I can't speak for West Africa, but in the cases of East Africa and in my own country and South Africa, you only see these electoral bodies present when it's the election year. Other than that, you won't hear for them for 4 or 5 years. If you can have consistent educational programs explaining to people why you should vote, because a lot of people don't understand why you should vote in the first place, or why you should get registered, why your vote matters. If you can have a present electoral commission, I know this sounds unrealistic, but these are ways in which we can strengthen our democracy. People will understand, okay, these are the people, you build integrity, people start trusting, like, okay, this is the body that's explaining this. So it's a slow and steady process. It's not going to happen overnight by just giving it money. You need a visible electoral commission, not just in your election year, but over the period of, okay, elections are done now, let's start with our new cycle. Let's prepare people, let's teach them, because you're going to have, new registered voters. So those are important things. I think that's the only way to do it. But it's not an easy process to build trust in an electoral commission, particularly in countries that suffer from corruption.
Is Africa's democracy a one-size-fits-all that, of course, ignores the continent's diversity and also the uniqueness of these individual countries? And if so, how do you think that impacts elections?
It's a tricky one. Yes, our continent is quite diverse. For example, use from West Africa, the way in which West Africans and just the countries itself, I really hate the characterization of Africa as one country. It's always spoken about in the UN, European bodies, all the Africans are the same. We're not. It plays a big role in the way in which our elections unfold in our governance system. So the way in which things are done in the rest of the continent, it has a real impact. And I think there needs to be a lot more introspective thinking on how we can incorporate the way in which we vote, our democracies or whichever political system, into those local governance systems. So, there's always this common thing that there was never kind of democracy or electoral systems in Africa. There always was, going back 400 or 500 years. It's just that it's been changed and it has this one standardized way, and we think it should work the way in which, you per se see it work in the West. But I think there are ways in which we can maneuver our system that it works appropriately. I think that's a real deficit in the democracies we see in Africa.
And on that note, let's take a short break now. And when we return, we'll look beyond the politics, asking what needs to be done or what needs to change so that elections translate into real progress, stronger institutions, and of course, a better life for its citizens. Stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Let's continue with our discussion. And still with me are Dr. Pipi Hughes, Guillaume Libby, and Jervin Naidu. Dr. Hughes, I'd like to go to you now. Now, in many African nations, elections are sort of treated as a winner-takes-all contest. And of course, this often leaves nearly half of the electorate, meaning those who voted differently, feeling excluded from leadership and also the national cake. So how can African nations adopt a more inclusive approach to elections?
This concept of winner takes all, it comes way back from our colonial history, where for instance, like in Central Africa, where most of these countries were colonized by France, the French, and also British. The French were using the policy of assimilation, while the British were using the policy of indirect rule, where they rule the people through their representatives. And also, most after independence, this mentality of winner takes all get inculcated in Africa. I think it is a system that needs to change. Because a winner takes all does not give us effective representation. For instance, if we have Cameroon, for instance, is a country of 30 million plus, and those who decide the fate of the country were just 8 million registered voters. So you discover that 22 million people did not take part in the elections, and their fate is being determined by 8 million people. Now, out of the 8 million people who registered to vote, not all the 8 million actually voted, just 5.2 million that actually voted. So you discover that the destiny of a country is being determined by 5 million people out of 30 million plus. And the system in Cameroon is just a simple majority. As long as you have, because there's no second round vote, as long as you have a simple majority, you are declared president and you are eligible to form a government. It is a serious issue that I think that Africans need to think out of that so that we can have this participatory democracy.
And Mr. Naidu, in most African elections, we know the period after elections is one that is the most tense. So post-election, how can countries in Africa build consensus and also resolve electoral differences?
Yeah, I think it also links to the question that you spoke to you about the winner takes all. The problem with the winner takes all and then now building a consensus is that you create the sort of us and them narrative. So we won, it's a zero-sum game. So they are the enemy. We're not interested in engaging with them, even though the opposition may represent an important they do represent an electorate in your country, whether you like them or not. So I think the key thing is then engaging, as you mentioned, having a participatory democracy system. So I think a lot of the problems in African countries is the way in which our electoral systems work, whether it be a person-to-person vote or just the way the system is created. It needs to be looked at in a lot of countries. For example, in South Africa, we're looking at changing the way in which we vote. There's some debates now, because in South Africa, we vote, for example, a political party who then elects their own president. So it's a different system. So coming back, to build consensus, you need to have the open space to allow opposition to operate, even if you don't like their opinion. And the problem is, what this winner takes all is like, I've won and that's the enemy now. So we don't engage with the enemy for another 4 or 5 years when elections come around. You can find ways to reach out. And it takes a lot of leadership and a lot of ability. And you also need strong civil society to help do that.
So, Dr. Hughes, perhaps a great example is what recently happened in Madagascar, also in the Sahel region, where we basically saw elected leaders were overthrown by the military. So what went wrong there? Do you think African elections really lead to development?
Now, one thing is certain: when elections are coming up, the citizens are expectant. There are so many issues that people want to see. I've cited a couple of examples like Ghana, Senegal, Malawi, Namibia. These are countries which we look up to in Africa as beacons of democracy. When elections emerge, there is a lot that citizens want to see. People want to see change. People want to see development. People want to see infrastructural advancement. People want to see improvement in healthcare. People want to see improvement in educational facilities. There are a lot of things people want to see. But what happens after these elections? I take practical examples as far as Cameroon is concerned. If we look at the opposition, all right, we have a fragmented opposition, which was a major weakness and a major advantage to the incumbent. So a lot has to be done as far as advancement of democracy is concerned, as far as the will of the people is concerned.
And Mr. Naidu, as we look at these two examples where we saw the military take over in the Sahel, also in Madagascar, do you think we need to rethink the whole process of elections in Africa? Has the importance of elections on the continent been sort of overstated?
You know, you look in Madagascar, the president has fled the country. You've got an interim government there, the alliance of the Sahel states. You see these military governments taking over, and it's a concern, I'm sure, for you and most of the West African countries. We don't want any of that sentiment, you know, particularly a couple of weeks ago, there were rumors of a coup in Nigeria, and President Tinubu acted fast to reshuffle his government. So there are concerns that maybe the democratic systems don't work. And I'm not saying that, you know, we should get rid of democracy and authoritarian, but maybe we should relook at it, that there's maybe some other system that could work that involves people. It's maybe not necessarily that, but we really need to think about it. And it's a worrying trend that you have, you know, these strong, you know, militaries taking over. You know, this will take the influence or initiatives from your citizens. You need people like, you know, you working in academia, myself in private sector, you guys in the media, businesses. You need a whole bunch of people to come together to figure out the solution, because I can tell you now, just having academics sitting there and creating a system, it's not the right way, or having just civil society. You need a complete buy-in from all the angles to reform what we think is the right governance system in Africa.
Right. And Mr. Libby, I'd like to get a sense of your outlook looking at the current realities in Côte d'Ivoire right now. How can African elections really move beyond being just political ritual and truly deliver on the promise of better governance, accountability, and also improved lives for the people?
Well, that's the reason why we all are engaged in politics, you know, to be able to provide ideas. And that's why the political scene must be sanitized, so that this way of sidelining other candidates has to be condemned from everywhere, because the only way to ensure that we can provide for the people, if it is that the sitting government must be held accountable for what they are doing, and that's come at the election time. It is also the opportunity for the opposition to come with new ideas. Say, okay, this is what I can do, this is what I can do, and this is the opportunity, and so forth, so that everybody is judged by what they are saying. Everybody is judged by what they are saying. But as of now, when you have the opportunity to set aside the rules and sideline the opposition, I mean, what are the incentives for you to do a good job for the people? So we believe that for the future and for the Africa as a whole, everywhere, we need to respect the constitution that we vote. We need to respect the law that we have in our book. We need to be abided by those, and we need to check to check what the government are doing, and we need to check also what the opposition want to do. That's the only way forward.
Dr. Hughes, what is your take on this?
elections across Africa of recent have had a similar trend. People call it the wind of change. And if you look at what's happening in the Sahel, in Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and even Gabon, where we have military takeover. And the issue here is the euphoria that comes with this military takeover. And people begin to ask ourselves, is this a new form of democracy? Because we believe that when juntas come to power, they always come to power with the promise of leading the country back to democracy. But most often we've discovered that when these juntas come to power, they try as much as possible to conserve this power. This is a trend in Africa. And most elections in Africa have been marred by post-election violence. It happened in Nigeria. It happened in Senegal, it happened in Kenya, it's happening in Cameroon, it's happened in our neighbors, Côte d'Ivoire, it's happening in Tanzania. So we begin to ask ourselves, is there a problem? Why is it that the citizens no longer have trust, faith, and confidence in the election management body? The results are contested across the globe. Not only Africa, even in Europe, in America, Donald Trump contested the elections in 2020. So you see that this is a trend. But what is the way forward? What is the way forward? Should Africa remain on this particular spot? No. There need to be high level of awareness. This gives rooms now for civil society organizations to come in, to create awareness, to carry out civic education, election education. Most people are not aware, all right? Like Nadia said about Elekam, after elections have passed, they disappear. They only appear after 4 or 5 years. We need continuous civic education on the importance of election, on the importance of transparency, on the importance of respecting, the decision of the election management body. A lot of advocacy needs to continue, and a lot of sensitization and voter education.
Mr. Naidu, what is your final word on this?
The problem is with democracies, our politicians are very short-minded. So if they're there for 4 or 5 years, they only want to achieve those goals and they want to stay in power. They're not thinking about a grand plan in 20 years' time. So I know it's not the best example. For example, the GERD in Ethiopia. The idea was set out in 2010. And there has been consistent leadership in the ruling Prosperity Party in Ethiopia that they want to build a GERD. Now, the problem is in some of the other African countries, we don't have that same kind of politician that comes there from the ruling party, or they always want to change what the idea is. And we keep building these half-finished projects. So the idea is to get a common consensus of what we want. So again, like I said, as you mentioned, it's not a straightforward answer that we can, but it's something we can work towards. And I'm hopeful that we can achieve. I'm always hopeful about Africa in general and our continent.
Thank you all for that insightful conversation. Well, that's all we have time for now on this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to our guests, Dr. P.P. Hughes, a political analyst, a lecturer, and a researcher of international law and human rights at the United Nations mandated University for Peace. Also, our other guest, Guillaume Libby, an economist, and Jervin Naidu, a political economist at Oxford Economics Africa. Now remember, you can be part of this conversation through our social media platforms on Facebook and X. And you can also watch this and other editions of Talk Africa on our YouTube playlist. Do join us again next week for more of Talk Africa. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team here in Nairobi. Until next time, goodbye.